Chinese President Xi Jinping has returned to Beijing after wrapping up his two-day visit to North Korea this afternoon. North Korean leader has showed willingness to continue dialogue with the U.S. on denuclearization, while President Xi vowed to support North Korea's security and development needs. Today, we go in-depth on the Kim-Xi summit analysis and the role of South Korea. For that, let's bring in Dr. Myong-hyun of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's always good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Chinese President Xi Jinping sure received the highest red carpet treatment from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un with 21 gun salute, an endless wave of ardent cheers from North Korean residents on the street. How do you assess Pyongyang's protocol?
Well, clearly the welcoming has been pretty intense, and I think it should be marked by a couple of firsts. I think it's the first time ever that North Korea has received a foreign leader and then gave him two welcomes, not just one. I mean, first time was at the Pyongyang's International Airport, the Asan International Airport. Then the welcome will continue well into the city in Pyongyang. And then there's another welcoming ceremony at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, where the mummified bodies of the leaders, previous leaders of Korea, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un, are located. So, hundreds of thousands of Pyongyang citizens turned out to welcome Xi Jinping. And plus, Xi Jinping was actually spent the night, was lodged a brand new guest house called Kumsusan Guest House. So in that sense, I think North Korea wanted to make sure that President Xi of China was felt totally welcome, and also make sure that to impress him with the scale of the welcome that wasn't registered before in North Korean history.
Xi Jinping's visit came as Kim Jong-un entered his 8th year at the helm of the North Korean regime. How much do you think Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit helped Kim Jong-un further cement his power domestically? Well,
it was a very important occasion for Kim Jong-un. We know that at the beginning of Kim Jong-un's era, when he started leader of North Korea back in 2011, Kim Jong-un hasn't been able to meet with Xi Jinping for at least 6 years. So that also had a very strong negative implications for Kim Jong-un, because we know that China and North Korea have a very long history together, and it was very, the leaders of two countries have already shown to be very close, and they made sure that everybody knew how close they were. But that wasn't possible that wasn't allowed for Kim Jong-un. So in that sense, I think Kim Jong-un felt that his legitimacy was a little bit undermined by the fact that the Chinese leader was, intentionally, unintentionally ignoring Kim Jong-un a little bit. So I think that was made up by this visit by Xi Jinping.
Do you think President Xi Jinping went back home with what he wanted, perhaps a big bargaining chip against the U.S.?
Clearly, this summit, despite the old expectations from the outside that this could lead to some sort of a material change to the ongoing pressure campaign by the United States, meaning that China might intentionally evade sanctions to help North Korea, wasn't so. The purpose of the summit was mostly about the optics of it. I think North Korea and China were more focused on the ceremony and the format of it, because they wanted to send a message to the United States that China and North Korea are very close now, and that China might be closer to the North Korea than the United States. I think that's exactly the message that North Korea and China wanted to send to the United States, especially now that the President Xi is going to go to the G20 meeting in Japan next week. So I think President Xi got what he wanted. I think he went back home with the perception that China is very influential in the Korean Peninsula, and the road to Pyongyang actually is through Beijing now.
So he sent a clear message to the U.S. and the world. According to Chinese media, Kim Jong-un has stated that he will be patient with the U.S. in dealing with the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. How do you interpret this?
Well, this is, again, the reaffirmation of what Kim Jong-un has said before. Earlier this year, Kim Jong-un, in his speech to the State Council, announced that he'll be waiting until the end of the year for the President Trump to change his attitude towards North Korea, meaning that President Trump he'll wait until President Trump gives up this current U.S. approach to negotiations, which is trying to reach this ground bargaining in which North Korea will have to give up or reach nuclear arsenal first before U.S. lifts any of the sanctions measures currently in place. So North Korea clearly wants the United States to take the step-by-step approach towards negotiations, meaning there will be sanctions was leave first, followed by denuclearization by North Korea. So I think this is something that I think it's been very clearly stated again by Kim Jong-un's remark, but also he also puts the ball on the American side, meaning it's the North Koreans who are committed to the dialogue. It's North Korea was patient about this, despite the fact that the United States is not really paying too much attention to North Korea. So I think with that remark, Kim Jong-un tried to gain not just the strategic upper hand, but the moral upper hand over the United States.
Chinese media also reported that Xi has vowed all necessary help for North Korea's security and development needs. Could you elaborate for us more specifically what Xi meant there?
Oh, okay. So there are two sides to this. There's obviously the security side and the development side. I think that Xi was, when it comes to the security side, I think Xi was referring to the new approach that China and Russia jointly has proposed in the international stage to solve the nuclear crisis in North Korea, which is the multilateral framework instead of bilateral negotiation framework that we have seen so far, first in Singapore, then in Hanoi, which failed. So in the multilateral framework, a number of countries in the neighborhood, mainly China and Russia, but plus Japan and South Korea, will guarantee security of North Korea in exchange for denuclearization. So I think that's something that China is referring to when they mention the security side to assist North Korea. So I mean, this is probably it echoes what happened in the 90s and the 2000s with the Agri framework and as well as the six-party talks, in which China took the leadership of engaging the negotiation with North Korea. So I think that's what China was referring to. On the development side, I think China is referring to the possible invitation to North Korea to join the Belt and Road Initiative. And there's been reports coming out of China since last year that China had invited North Korea to join the Belt and Road Initiative, which would represent a major investment in the infrastructure in North Korea, which is sorely needed right now. So I think this is one of the promises that China made to North Korea.
Now, but Chinese news outlets reported very specifically on Xi's words, on Xi's promise to help North Korea's development and security needs. But North Korean media completely left that part out of their coverage. Why?
Well, clearly, I think the North Koreans are not too happy about starting a multilateral approach to those negotiations because I think North Korea is still invested in this bilateral framework with the United States, a written agreement, a complete agreement with the United States alone, so which will really raise the North Korea's standing as a country in the world. So I think they're still clinging to that idea a little bit, so that's why they might not be too happy or they wouldn't want to confirm this at this juncture, maybe. And on the development side, I mean, invitation to the Belt and Road initiatives are good because it will represent billions and billions of dollars investment in the infrastructure sector in North Korea. But at the same time, it comes with a condition, which is a successful negotiation with the United States when it comes to North Korea's denuclearization. So it might not happen in the short term, whereas North Korea would need a major economic assistance right now. So maybe that's the reason why North Korea is not really mentioning it right now.
Now, as you've mentioned, recent denuclearization efforts were mostly played out by the two Koreas and the U.S., mostly through bilateral talks. But obviously, China wants to be back in the game and play a more active role in on the nuclear issue. But do you think it would be better or worse in denuclearizing North Korea if China takes a bigger role?
Oh, of course. There are always there are pros and cons to this process. I mean, giving a major role to China, I mean, on the beneficial side, would actually introduce a stabilizing factor, this volatile negotiation process between Washington and Pyongyang. We have seen how volatile the dialogue between the two countries can be. We have seen this in Singapore, we have seen this in Hanoi. So maybe with China playing a bigger role, we can introduce a bigger player who's more influential over both countries that can stabilize this volatility in the negotiations. So that theoretically represents the beneficial side to a major role to China. On the other hand, there's a downside to this too, because China comes into this negotiation framework with its own agenda, so to speak. I mean, for China, the priority well, North Korea is a priority for them, but at the same time, there's another priority for them, which is the negotiation with the United States, which is more serious for the Chinese because it affects their economic side and also it affects their standing in the world as well. So China might be tempted to use their role in the negotiation process with North Korea as a leverage to gain concessions from the United States in the ongoing trade spat that also as the issue over Taiwan. So that might complicate the already complicated situation in the Korean Peninsula. So it's really up to the Chinese how they want to employ their leverage that they have now over North Korea.
Now, Kim Jong-un also told Xi Jinping that he hopes to learn more about China's economic development. But is it possible for China to further support North Korea economically, despite the heavy sanctions still imposed on Pyongyang?
Well, clearly that's the reason why China didn't make any concrete promise to help North Korea economically at the moment. That's the reason why they mentioned this vague commitment to help North Korea's development. China is not willing to evade the sanctions measures, which they themselves authorized through their participation, their role in the United Nations Security Council. So China respects the role of the United Nations Security Council because it's one of the few leverages they have over the United States. So they're not about to undermine that role by helping North Korea. So that's the reason why they're not going to violate the sanctions themselves. So I think that's the reason why I think North Korea is it's really bit unhappy about the outcome of this summit. But at the same time, I think North Korea was adjusting the expectation because they know the constraints that China is facing right now.
Now, the U.S. State Department released its annual report, and it designated North Korea as one of the worst human trafficking nations for the 17th consecutive year, while also naming China at the bottom tier 3 category. Now, this follows Washington's sanctions on a Russian firm suspected of having links to North Korea. What does this tell you about Washington's stance?
Well, clearly the timing of the report is actually strategic because, it's around this time of the year that the State Department issues the report on the human trafficking. If you look at the media reports, in 2016, the State Department issued a report in end of June 27th to 28th, again the same date in 2017, and again in 2018. So, the timing has been shifted a little bit, coincide with the Kim Xi summit in Pyongyang. So clearly, I think United States is sending a message to both China and North Korea that there are many ways that the United States can inflict pain on both countries, and this is a reminder that China shouldn't stray away from the current and the negotiation roadmap that President Trump has in mind.
So you think U.S. did calculate the timing to release this report?
Absolutely.
China apparently wants to wield more clout in North Korea's nuclear issue, and this is stirring up concerns that South Korea may lose ground as for its role as a mediator. Do you think South Korea needs a new strategy?
Absolutely. I think it's unfortunate that the optics of it indicates that North Korea is empowering China to broker the future negotiation between Pyongyang and Washington rather than Seoul. I think North Korea has been, from their perspective, has been frustrated about the lack of progress in terms of relieving sanctions. North Korea, they have an unrealistic expectation about this, but nonetheless, they expected South Korea to somehow take the initiative and then convince Washington to relieve some of the sanctions measures currently in place. So that hasn't happened. So I think Pyongyang is now empowering Beijing, giving all the strategic benefits that entails. So I think South Korea will have to make a quick calculation. One option is to compete against China in terms of gaining, favorable stance from Pyongyang, and that will take a lot of daring on the part of South Korea. Meaning, we'll have to somehow stand up to Washington and try to convince Washington that we should relieve some of the sanctions measures, which has a very strong implication for our security and the economy. So probably it's not possible. So the other one is maybe South Korea should offer the option of starting a multilateral approach, which should actually increase the role for South Korea, but also one of the players in the negotiation table rather than being one of the sole player, with North Korea. So it represents a step back for South Korea, but then, these are the things. I think South Korea should maximize its upside despite all the constraints that it's facing right now.
The South Korean government, meanwhile, continues to signal North Korea that it wants to hold another round of inter-Korean summit as soon as possible. And Unification Minister Kim Jong-un today confirmed that by saying that government is continuing to send that message to North Korea. How soon do you think the fourth round of inter-Korean summit can take place?
Well, that's just, I mean, I'm not very optimistic about, whether, the first inter-Korean summit could take place anytime soon. And the reason is because if North Korea has indeed replaced South Korea with China, so essentially empowering China instead of South Korea, then there's less need for Kim Jong-un to have another summit with President Moon. And because Kim will rely on Beijing to somehow, relay the negotiation message to Washington. Also, rely on the Chinese support to somehow make the North Korean stand towards negotiation firmer. So in that sense, there's less space for South Korea to get in this game. So if there's less space, there's less need for Pyongyang to rely on Seoul. So therefore, the inter-Korean summit will be less of a priority for North Korea. For North Korea, the priority will be having they already had Xi-Kim summit. So therefore, the next objective for Kim Jong-un will be to have the next round of the third U.S. DPRK summit. So that'll be the top priority for North Korea, and then not the inter-Korean summit.
Well, South Korea surely, for sure, stands at a critical crossroad in terms of denuclearizing North Korea right now. Let's see how things unfold from this point on. Thank you so much, Dr. Go, as always, for your insights.
My pleasure.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching.